We have our second speaker as another senior fellow of the Austin Institute, professor of economics at Brigham Young University, Professor Joseph Price, with a talk with the title, Understanding the Future of Families by Looking to the Past.
So Mariana asked me to predict the future of human relationships, at least over the next decade. And I told her that I am knee-deep in the 1920s at the moment. So I am an economic historian at the moment, so I've been very interested in historical data, and so I am going to tell you one thing that will be my prediction about the next 10 years, something that worries me a little bit, and some possible solutions. But then I do want to go back into the past and highlight the fact that sometimes taking the long view of some of these patterns is really important. I think the recent book by Robert Putnam and Shaylin Romney-Garrett, Upswing, is a really good example of this, of just looking at where we are today and saying, have we ever been here before? And the answer is usually yes. Now, I think there's some challenges that we faced in the last decade with COVID and disruptions of the labor market and inflation, which were things that I don't think we could have seen coming. Now, we could have seen them if we'd taken a long view of saying, we don't know what's going to happen in the next decade, but we know that these things happen with some regularity and that major pandemics happen with some regularity. So the timing might be surprising, but the things that hit us shouldn't. So here's my prediction. I think that one of the challenges that will face families over the next decade is going to be rising housing costs. I'm going to frame this challenge in a personal way. So my wife Emily's here with me. We have 7 kids, and we've lived in the same home since 2007. So when we bought our home, the interest rate was about 2%. Our home cost about $200,000. And it's been interesting since we've lived in the home so long to see what's happened to the price of that home or houses near us. And that home is now about $500,000, and the interest rate is about 7%. So as an economist, I say, wow, think of new me wanting to move into my neighborhood. Just the interest alone each year would be about $35,000. So that's very different than the situation that we faced. And actually at a recent kind of neighborhood meeting with some other parents in our neighborhood, the question, it was such an interesting question. It was like, will our kids be able to live in this neighborhood? And I think that is going to be a bigger and bigger challenge. In fact, I just saw a report that says that in Salt Lake City now you need to earn $110,000 to be a homeowner. And Austin is actually a little bit higher. It's $122,000. So I think what that means is that increasingly it'll have to be 2 parents that combine their income to get into that threshold. Now, I do see 2 positive offsetting factors, so they're going to involve a little bit of adjustment. So first, I do see that we are building more high-density apartments with nice amenities and proximity to public transportation. So if we can find a way to reset our expectations about where it's okay to raise a young family, I think this could work. I think if young couples start out in an apartment and save up money and then buy the house later on, I think it could work. The key thing from a public perspective is we need to decouple the value of your home from the quality of your school, because that's the rub. Unless you're homeschooled, then it's easy. But many of us, choose our home because we want the school, and sadly that puts us into this very expensive home trap. The other positive thing I see is a shift to remote work, which is making it possible to live in a wide variety of locations. So this has allowed people to live in cheaper places and work remotely. And the challenge, I think, is that for very highly educated workers, there's going to always be this draw to want to work in a tech hub, and those tech hubs are always going to be in either urban areas or near college campuses, both very expensive places to live. Now, granted, that group is making more money today, so for them it works out. So I think probably the group that's going to be affected the most are those that feel drawn to live in those tech hubs, those urban areas near college campuses, but don't have the education to take on the high salary jobs. And so I think the solution for those families, sadly, is that they tend to adopt very long commutes. And so I think the long run consequence of housing costs is it kind of hides a little bit, which is it's not the housing, it's the time with children. And so I actually see this as a growing inequality between the families that get to live near where they work and have the nice schools and the families that have to travel farther away to go to work. So some of my research has been about the value of parental time in children. In fact, Mariana and I did an interview about this, and I just reflect about this inequality. So both my family now and the family that I grew up in were characterized by families in which only one of the parents had to work, and parents who had a short commute. In fact, my dad's commute was 0 minutes. He worked in an office in our home. But I think this is going to become increasingly rare for many families. So the second thing I wanted to do, so let me just summarize that. I see this as something that worries me about families over the next decade. I see there's some possible solutions. But I think the biggest change we're going to see is that families are going to increasingly wonder if they can afford to have more kids. And so the thing that worries me the most is as I interact with college students is that in my own life, my role as a parent has been the most transformative experience that I've ever had. In fact, one thing I should tell you about having 7 kids is it's really hard to be cool. It's almost impossible to go to church without one of your kids looking funny. And it's really hard to go on an airplane without people looking at you weird. It kind of strips away all that ability to be cool. And that's actually like one of the coolest things that can happen to you. Because the moment you don't feel like you can be cool, then you can just be real. And actually being real is the way to have real connection with other people. So I'm grateful. Just our Lyft driver on the way here was just blown away that we have 7 kids. He thought that was crazy. And so I worry about a world in which someone might look at the world and say we could never possibly have 4 kids. And that in some sense by that worry, economic worry that they can't have 4 kids, they're going to miss out on what might have been the most transformative part of their life. So the second thing I want to do is just mention the value of taking the long run view. So I mentioned the book Upswing by Robert Putnam and Shailene Romney Garrett. I actually read this during COVID. We were in Costa Rica at the time as a family, and I remember just listening to this book and just having it just change the way I thought about things. That the idea that you could take any situation you're in today and ask, when has this happened before and what do we do about it? It was just like the power of economic history or history in general. So here's something I want to read from what they wrote. They said, they note that the deep and accelerating inequality, unprecedented political polarization, vitriolic public discourse, and a fraying social fabric, which you might think of maybe describes today, are in fact how you would describe the Gilded Age of the late 1800s. And then in the early 1900s, the United States became more egalitarian, more cooperative, and more generous. So my research lately has been to compile a large longitudinal data set of the United States going from 1850 to 1940. What I do is I follow families across census records. So I get a snapshot of your family every 10 years. And this is something that a lot of social scientists have been trying to do for a long time. And the gift was to take AI, that dangerous tool, and combine it with genealogy, which is a very powerful connective tool that people have been doing for 150 years. And it turns out that if you put those two things together, this marriage of technology and human intuition, you can in fact create massive longitudinal data sets. So our longitudinal data set in the United States includes about 200 million people. It gives you kind of an unprecedented view of what happens over long periods of time. We've been using it to, and this data set is called the census tree. And in fact, researchers can now download it and link it to data from IPUMS. So anyone can just download it and do studies with it. But some of the things I've been able to do it is look at intergenerational mobility. Ask the question is the American dream, when was it the strongest? When was it the most likely that a child of poor parents could rise and move into the upper and middle class? We've been really interested in the link between education and lifespan, and then we've been really interested in the returns to the social aspects of education, something I would view as like a core part of what the Austin Institute does. So one of my first projects using historical data was with the Austin Institute. Kevin Stewart and I wrote a report called Called Out at Home. And we examined whether professional baseball players were more likely to have grown up in a home with a father present. And it was this interesting idea that if you want to play basketball, you can play by yourself. You just dribble and shoot. Almost everything you do in basketball, you can do by yourself. But baseball is this unique sport where there is almost nothing you can do without another person. It's really hard to play catch with yourself. It's really hard to pitch to yourself. Like it's a team. It's a partner sport. And so we just thought that this might mean that fathers or parents would play a key role in that world. And if you've ever seen Field of Dreams, you know there's that scene at the end that just makes you cry because the moment he reunites with his dad, it's his dad says, "You want to play catch?" And so in the course of doing that, we focused mostly on modern players, and we did in fact find that professional baseball players are much more likely to have had a father growing up. I became really interested in professional players in the Negro Leagues. This was a league that stretched from about 1920 to 1951. And so I linked all the players that I could find in the Negro Leagues back to their census records when they were children. And I learned something really interesting. Almost all of them had a father when they were born. It was like astounding. But many of them did not have a father when they were teenagers. And so you see this like emergence of the single mother home in the Black community just within this interesting sample of baseball players. What I discovered is that actually this single parenthood was not the result of out-of-wedlock childbearing or divorce. It was the result of death. These were widows raising their teenage children. So it got me wondering a lot about maybe what we see today with single motherhood might have been a natural adaptation to an exogenous shock to a system, which is at the time, our labor markets were organized in such a way that Black fathers were in jobs that were more dangerous and harder on their health, such that we had differential mortality rates between Black and white fathers. And so just because of this labor market issue, we end up with families adapting in natural ways that actually, even once that differential mortality declined through making workplaces safer, you created a community of women who had adapted in a way to become more independent in response to this. So I don't know if this is why we saw a rise in single motherhood within the Black community and now in other groups, but I just wanted to highlight this. So think of this as just an open hypothesis of a scientist who likes looking at data and is curious. But I just wanted to illustrate it is that I think we can dig deep into the roots of our past to learn more about what we might think will happen in the future. So I think what we can do is look at each of the challenges facing families today, and we can use the upswing as a guide for how to look at examples in the past to find solutions that might work. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. And yeah, if our audience needed to understand like the kind of research and how deep it is and like original it is, I think they got a good sense of it.